Hello, I'm Sophie Hooper, Head of Policy at IWFM, hosting today's webinar from sunny South Cambridgeshire. Welcome to today's episode where I'm in conversation with Andrew and Patrick to talk about how Nationwide is transforming the future of work. Now, in previous episodes, we've talked a lot about our own research on employer expectations around the future of work, and we've definitely seen some back and forth over time around employees' desires to return to the office. Our last research from spring showed that employees, including and perhaps surprisingly also, especially younger generations, are expecting more flexibility about where they work. At the same time, we saw a flurry of organisations making announcements about hybrid working, including from Nationwide. And I'm quoting its chief executive, Joe Garner, who mentioned how the last year has taught us, many of us, that how we do our jobs is much more important than where we do them from. We are putting our employees in control of where they work from, inviting them to locate for their day, depending on what they need to achieve. Now that we are 7 months on from that announcement, Nationwide, and especially Andrew and Patrick, have agreed to share their experiences and aspirations for the future. Now, as a concept, hybrid working sounds great, but its implementation throws up loads of questions and challenges. And what does it actually even mean in practice? Because it seems to differ from organisation to organisation. Nationwide offers total choice to the employee where that's possible, and others offer up a range of job profiles to provide some structure and guidance about when to be in the office and how often. Now, this current shift in ways of working has been hailed as a new way of working, but are the principles of hybrid working really new? Fact is that the concepts of workplace and workplace experience have been around for several years, and it's just that the pandemic experience appears to have brought it to the fore and made organizations think about this, and often have thought that this is an opportunity or an incentive then to go for better workplace experiences. As the Institute of Workplace and Facilities Management, it's not surprisingly that we would argue that the core elements of workplace, the space, in combination with culture and technology, has just had a back to basics rethink about what work and enabling it really means for each organization. And that's really why we're keen to explore with an organization today how it's working for them in practice. And we know that many more organizations want to know what the core elements are for a productive workplace, the environmental factors enabling that space, whether that's from a public health perspective or a productivity perspective, but things like air quality, light, acoustics, choice, comforts, etc. The cultural policies enabling that flexibility and choice, and the technology to help make all of that a reality, that plurality of choice of space, all combined into a workplace experience that really helps us to connect with others, our colleagues. Now, the challenge for many organizations will be to make sure that the space and the experience within that workspace will offer employees genuine flexibility and a choice to do their best possible work wherever they work. And especially that last element is a very big challenge for FMs, because that space that needs adapting to this new way of working, or is it new, could really be anywhere. And this is really what widens and challenges the remit of workplace and FM managers. So this webinar really is an opportunity to discuss in detail what the main drivers and guiding principle were for the changes on the future of working Nationwide. And we will kind of move about from strategic decisions over operational impact, and then really turn our attention to the aspirations for the future, touching on the different elements of workplace, culture, workspace, and IT. Now, we will talk about what's worked, how has it worked, what still needs ironing out across that Nationwide portfolio. And we want to know really how this has really changed and impacted the role of the FM teams within the organization, and also how those teams, your FM teams, are working with other functions in Nationwide. So hopefully we'll get to reflect a little bit on the shifts that you may have already seen taking place and the aspirations for your workplace in the future. I would like to remind the audience, please, that after the initial conversations that we're planning to have with Andrew and Patrick, we will have about 25 minutes of Q&A session. So please start sending in your questions. And if you want to remain anonymous, then please just type Anon, A-N-O-N, before your question. So before we get into the discussion, can I please ask Andrew and Patrick to introduce yourselves, please, and share a little bit about your role in enabling nationwide colleagues to work from anywhere. Andrew, perhaps we can start.
I'll go first. Hi everyone, Andrew Tuck. I head up workplace property services in Nationwide, and sort of responsible for all property elements of things in Nationwide. Background is civil engineering and estates management in consultancy and client side, contractor side. So been around for a few years, involved in property and all things to do with property.
And I'm Patrick O'Farrell, and up until very recently I was the head of facilities management at Nationwide, a role I held for many years. And then in the last few months, we're very pleased to have been asked to lead a transformation of the entire property services, supporting a bunch of very talented leaders across property services to transform the function into being the very best it can be. Thank you.
Thank you both. So before we really get into the discussion around how you operationalize this work from anywhere policy, I think it might be useful to outline what we are talking about, given how different that is understood across organizations. So what did your March 2021 announcement really say about the future of work within Nationwide? What does it really mean?
That's an interesting question to start with. I think what we'd experienced through the pandemic was sort of a resetting of the thinking around the way we did work. So what we were finding was, after the initial sort of retreat to home, we had to keep the business running. So we kept the business running throughout the whole pandemic, and we kept all our offices open, but to very much reduced numbers, with the majority of people moving to isolation and working from home. Enabling that was a big rollout of laptops. That was a key enabler. Microsoft Teams was, luckily we just started the adoption of that prior to, and that enabled us to very quickly move into working from home and keeping the business running. What we went into incident management mode at the time, but what we found very quickly, that enabled us to do things that normally would take a long time. We just did very quickly. The business freed everyone up to be able to respond to the crisis, and we found very quickly that productivity efficiency was not dropping very much at all. If not, it was slightly increasing at the time, and people were feeling safe in their environment. And we moved to survey, really. We wanted to test that quite quickly. So prior to the announcement, we tested what people were thinking. It was a point in time, and it gave the results it gave, which was the majority of people wanted to work from home. Very few wanted to return to office full time, and that allowed us to start thinking about what the future was of work. Luckily, we'd already started on that transition, and hopefully this is we're in our post building today in London, which was the move from Threadneedle Street to more central London, which was a building which was to enable a more collaborative, a more inclusive way of working, and that sort of set the thinking about what we would use offices for as we came out of the pandemic. So we had a good head start, but I say the pandemic allowed us to reset our thinking, which was really when Joe talked about work is what you do, not where you do it from. And that's sort of taken us on the journey, which we'll talk more through. But that was our starting point, really. So we were on that journey, and we were allowed to reset at sort of beginning of this year. Patrick?
No, you've covered it wonderfully well, I think, Andrew.
Okay, thank you. I think what I'd be interested to know is how that decision about working from anywhere from the future, are there choices that are being offered that were perhaps not quite being offered within the whole pandemic working from home. So looking ahead, since that decision in March, what is kind of different in addition to the pandemic home working?
Well, I think pre-pandemic, we probably had, like many organisations, a hint, if not more, of presenteeism in our organisation. And what happened is there was a lead from the very, very top of the organisation around what the future would look like. And that strong leadership from the top that's permeated through the whole organisation is one of the things that's enabled us. We'll come on and talk about culture in a minute, the culture of the organisation and how that's enabled us. But that leadership from the very, very top of setting a very clear vision of what it is we want to do and the direction we're going was absolutely key for us to be able to do the things we've done.
And I think since then, the question, that question is, what is different now to in the pandemic? And I think the ability is, we never closed off our offices for folk to come into. And we're really clear now that people can come into the offices. We're not encouraging everyone to come in because we've still got some social distancing, etc. But we're asking people to make the right choice themselves in their teams, set themselves in the right place to do the work they need to do for the day. And I think that's quite key. So if you want to sit down with your PC, your laptop and do some solo work, you can find a quiet place in an office. You can do that from home. You're enabled to be able to do that from a coffee shop, a railway station, or whatever. So effectively that flexibility of work. If you want to collaborate, what's collaboration mean? Often it just means have a meeting, but in whatever sense it means, if you want to come and have a meeting, you want to meet face to face, that's fine as long as you want to do that. There's no forcing people to do that, and we're having to account for people who still don't want to come out from their safety of where they're working, and that's very, very important. And then we also recognise that there is a need to socialise, and so some of the reasons to come together are not purely from a workplace productivity collaboration point, but some it's okay to come together to socialise. So come in your team to a building, have a meeting or a collaboration, or just come to work and socialise sort of at lunchtime or after work or pre-work or whatever. So there's a lot more recognition of the social element of work, and we largely had to ignore that in the pandemic. That was one thing that people just couldn't do at the time, and now we realise there is a desire for people to do that, and that's really important as we design going forward.
That's great, thank you. Now, you mentioned a few things a few questions ago that I actually want to go back to, and that was around agility and quickly allowing people to work from home. And then, Patrick, you mentioned culture and really that leadership and drive top down to enable changes. I guess what I'm interested in finding out a bit more is, where do you think some of the elements are? What are the key elements that allow you to make this future of work announcements kind of as one of the first big UK brands, but also at the beginning of the pandemic, you were able to respond quite quickly?
Well, if I just talk about the response and then move on to the culture stuff. So our IT department and the folks who run our what we call our end user services were absolutely fantastic. They Andrew said we launched this thing called Microsoft Teams just a couple of months before the pandemic kicked in. We weren't quite sure how we were going to exploit it, but my God, we soon got used to doing it and using it. So it was fantastic. The guys in our IT department very, very quickly did things like test the bandwidth. If 11,000 people concurrently wanted to dial in, what would it do to our systems? They got hold of laptops, enabled remote connectivity, and did an absolutely cracking job to make sure everybody was able to connect remotely. On the cultural side of things, we have a values framework within Nationwide that we call Pride. So if I could just dwell on that for a couple of seconds, because I think this is an absolute key enabler for what we've been able to do and how we're going to move forward. So Pride in Nationwide, it's a values framework we've had for the thick end of 20 years now, I reckon. And if I just go through it really quickly, so the P in Pride talks to, so actually, let me just take a step back. Within Nationwide, what we do is highly regulated. So the rules around what we do are very well defined. How we do it, this some 20 years ago, how we behave and how we operate with each other is what we call our Pride framework, these values framework. The P in Pride, it talks about putting our members and their money first. So whenever we make a decision, we have to be able to make that decision thinking there's a member in the room and we can justify that decision in front of them. We talk about the R in Pride being rising to the challenge. So that's all about being flexible and agile, have this learning mentality and this determination to continuously improve. The I in Pride is about inspiring trust. So that's understanding that we all have a collective goal. We recognize the values each other brings towards that common goal. D is about doing the right thing in the right way. So all of our decisions have to be done with compassion, humanity, and care, and all of those really important values to us. And E then, we come on to what's E at the last, E's just gone from me at the minute, empowering others. So E is about empowering others. And that's about creating an environment where people's wellness and they feel, is at the top of the agenda and they feel valued. And all of those things create an environment where we all feel trusted. I feel very trusted, and all of our people we work with feel trusted. And so it's in that environment where people are managed by outputs, it enables us to go from where we are today and almost exploit that cultural identity to enable us to continue. There's a danger, of course, that we don't lose that cultural identity by having a different working environment. That's something that's really, really high on our agenda.
Yeah, so I think just to build on that, it was why we were able to do what we did in the pandemic is because of our Pride values. Allowed us to just do some things without having to worry to think about our people and members in that value framework that Patrick just explained. And then that's allowed us to think about the future together. And actually what we're thinking about is the people that do the work, make the productivity, that serve the members. They're the most important element of what we've got. So you can have all the technology, all of the systems and processes, but it's all about the people. So actually listening to our people, talking to our people, surveying and checking in, so we have 90 workplace reps that effectively are from the pandemic coming out. It's what we call reimagining work, is actually what do they take from their areas of workplace and feed that in to make sure that what we're designing works for them. And that's when Joe was able to come out and talk about work is a thing, not a place, and allowing people to work from where they want to. Not to say we've got all the answers for that, but actually it's just a step we've gone on to. And our occupation at the moment is still low. It's increased sort of in the last 2 or 3 months as we're starting to open up. But is it ever going to go back to pre-pandemic? It doesn't appear so at the moment, and it will be a long way off. But actually, when you come into the office, the environment's different. It's there to make you warm, welcome, and you feel part of what you're doing is joined up and helps with this cultural fix as you need to do, which is one of the things we're concerned about with people being remote from each other. So hopefully that goes somewhere.
It's quite obvious that culture, well, for us, culture is one of the elements that really are what making workplaces successful. And having worked with you in the past, it's very clear that that's something that's driven. And the first time I saw it really was within the post-Carillion experience. And I just wondered, because you were quite agile then, if that in any way had affected the way that you were making decisions right now as well.
Yes, I mean, I'm not going to go over what we did with the Carillion collapse, but we were incredibly agile. And again, that came from having support at the very, very top. Very early days, we were able to articulate what it is we wanted to do. We were given permission to make it happen. And my God, we did make it happen, and we made it happen really quickly. And I do think we're seeing the benefit of that now, and we have seen it through the pandemic, because we gave comfort and security to several hundred people at a time of, they were very anxious about their jobs, very anxious about their families and what was going to happen to them. We were able to get rid of all of that anxiety very, very quickly. So there's this great loyalty that they have towards the organization. And we were able to see that paid back in spades in the early days of the pandemic, with people's willingness to just get involved and make sure that the environments that we were creating for those who had to come into work were as good as they possibly could be, and continue to evolve and mature as we learned more and more and got a little bit more sophisticated in our response to the pandemic. And I think it gave us a lot of flexibility, Andrew, and a bit of agility.
Yes, I think what the big thing for me is by putting people first in that situation. So as soon as the Carillion collapse was there, we said, what's the most important thing? The most important thing is the people. And that drove everything from the very top downwards and allowed us to make all the right decisions. And some of them were quite risky decisions, because we effectively gave an employment contract to people on the day that we didn't even know how many people there were. So on the day we were able to put the people first and sort the problems out afterwards, which was incredibly empowering for everybody. What that gave us by putting the people first, it gave us credit in effect, it gave us, by including everybody, by putting them first, they've gone the extra mile, and that's what happened during the pandemic. And we were able to move really, really quickly. And the teams that were on site throughout the pandemic were the facilities teams, the ex-Carillion folk there, and they rose to the challenge. And luckily we were the team of the year last year across the whole of nationwide because of the effort they put in. And Joe Garner often quotes the importance of what we call our missions, our end-to-end delivery now is the facilities teams are the ones that enable that. And previously they would have been seen to be a non-core part of the business and therefore outsourced. So actually by bringing it in, it's seen as the importance of that as we go forward. And that really is what's driven all of our ability to be able to change quickly and include everybody and make them feel included and go that extra mile.
Thank you for that. That's kind of all quite strategic and informing the strategic decisions, but I think looking at some of the operationalizing of all of this, how on earth do you start operationalizing working from anywhere?
It's a really good point, actually. So the one thing we've talked about, so the one thing we took away from the pandemic, coming out of the pandemic, was really plays true to IWFM and the future workplace. So that linking up of what we call people and culture, HR, the people side of things, linking up the IT side, linking up the property, facilities, real estate side of things. We saw that all coming together. Now, how does that operationalize? So what we've done in recognizing that home is a workplace and taking ownership of that within the property team. So effectively, the third workplace, be it retail, be it office, or be it home, is actually owned. So the health and safety of the folk, the well-being, which is the P&C issue, but also mental, physical wellness in there. That's quite key. As everyone enabled to be able to work. So treating that like a workplace rather than somebody who's just at home is really, really important in that. And then what we've done is we've really emphasised when people come into an office, they need to feel special. They need to feel comfortable. They need to be able to be enabled to work, to be able to do what they want to do. So we've literally rolled out what we're calling workplace hosts, which effectively are floor hosts for all of the buildings to enable people to be their very best, to make sure that they get a great experience, be it on their first day or their last day or every day as they work through from nationwide. That service-driven element has made a big difference. And because coming off of the pandemic, we've been allowed to have that role, whereas before that service role may have been squeezed out of the organisation due to sort of cost cutting, etc., etc. So the value of service, so in serving people when they come into the office, is one example of where we're going to make a difference and operationalise.
Yeah, so that role of the floor host is really, really interesting. So now when you come into one of our buildings, you will have a single point of contact, somebody who will help you with the orientation around the building. If you haven't been before, you haven't been in for a while because things might be different. They will help you sort out your IT problems. They will make sure the meeting room that you've booked is set up for the way you want to set it up, that all of the facilities, you don't have to spend the first 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes in the meeting room trying to work out how the IT kit works. It'll all be ready for you. And they act as so they pull together some of the cultural elements, that service element, that FM element, and we've now got several of them across the country, and it's working brilliantly. The feedback has been fantastic. And interestingly, we've gone to the hospitality sector to recruit some of these characters. So ex-hotel employee type services entirely outside of what we traditionally would have gone for. So that's been interesting.
I think the other operational area which has gone for the better has always been this link at the tactical level, such as meeting room layout between IT and workplace. And sort of is that a facilities problem or is it an IT problem? We've just overcome that, but they're still split into separate areas. But rather than say worry about the interface, it's we need to prepare the workplace every day for the people to come and use it. So don't worry about whose issue it is, solve it collectively together, which is a big difference, because that's two silos that often, in my experience here and other organisations, never ever wanted to work together. So that's a big difference.
Thank you for that. I've got a few space-related questions, and actually there's a question here from Gary that I'd like to bring in at this point in time already, because you have referenced the fact that you were moving from Threadneedle to the post office. And so they've obviously picked up on that as well, that saying that you were in the middle of a move to a new premise. This makes it easier to bring in change. How did the change influence the amount of space you need? And how did you design in the requisite work settings, given it's all new?
So that's a really good question. We opened the post, or didn't open the post, about a week before the pandemic, I think. So we literally set for the new world. And I was thinking about this earlier today, was what would have happened I'll use the post as an example. So the post was enable us to move away from a very rigid office environment towards a more inclusive. So it's lots of collaboration space, lots of meeting space, lots of third space, socialising space, and desking. So that's what the post was originally. Today we're in here and probably it's good for about 600 people. We'll probably have 100, 150 in here today. It's middle of the week, and that's the sort of levels we're running throughout the estate. What we have a problem with, which I'm sure everyone's got the post, so if we maintain at these levels, we don't need the space we've got here. So that's part of the unknown as we go forward. But what we've done though with the space we're here, as we're coming out of the pandemic, we're trialing events of different sizes, so small meetings, social distancing, big meetings, town hall meetings, and we're already literally last week changed some of the space, took some desking out and made some more collaboration space, because we had 100 and 150 people in having a town hall all day with various events. When they broke out, they didn't want to go and sit at a desk, they wanted to go and sit in some sort of more informal area and work together. And so we literally took about 30 desks out, 40 desks out, and replaced it with some furniture. So we're sort of testing and learning as we're going, and that's part of the culture. Is we're not always going to get it right, so let's just keep doing little experiments and changing as we go. So that's what we're doing with the post. But of course, we've now got that problem throughout all of the estate, and I'm sure everyone on this call has got the same issue around their real estate. How much real estate are we going to need in the future? We sort of have a projection, but it's probably the wrong projection. And who knows? Because my personal feeling is that we will increase people in the office, but nowhere near to the levels that we had pre-pandemic. But were they the right levels anyway? Because the issue then was, how do we get a ratio of 0.6 to work? Well, actually, was that ever the right ratio in the first place? Because what do you do with everybody who's not in the 0.6, either the 1.5 people who haven't got a desk to go to? Do they work at home, or do they work in the street, or do they just crowd in the office? Now, it's a different mindset to that problem. So I think we'll be testing and learning as we go, but there will be a conundrum as we go through this, what to do with the space. And that's, I think everyone's going to have the same issue.
Yeah, if I could come in on that one, because that is provided that the people have that flexibility of choice, but you've already mentioned as well that you're a highly regulated organisation. So there are people that don't necessarily have that flexibility of choice of workspace. What do you really do then as an organisation, given your values of inclusivity, to make sure that the impact on those people that have a lesser degree of flexibility, that they still have a sense of equality and fairness? So how is flexibility filled in for them?
So some of that is we're not really able to share just now. I know we're going to have an open conversation, but we can't really share just now because there will be some policies that will be published to the organisation probably by Christmas, we think, which will talk to some of that. But you should know that it's something that's very, very high on our agenda. So how do you make the workplace more attractive for those who do need to come in, and that they don't feel that we have an us and them, we work from home, we work in a workplace type mentality. So it's very, very high on our agenda, Sophie. And will we get it right when we publish all the policies? I'd like to think we will, but I also think we're smart enough and grown up enough that if we don't get it right, we will get it right.
Yeah, so just building on that, I think in the office environment, it was surprising how few roles had to stay in the office, and a lot of that was that there is obviously the regulated issue that we need, the security issues that need to be dealt with. And I'm dealing with one of those at the moment personally, because I'm trying to unpick the encryption on my laptop that's been put in for working sort of at home. So there was very few. Mainly it was driven by some older systems that were set on to hard drives, PCs, etc. But we even then picked those up and put them in people's houses as well. So in the office environment, it's very few. But those few that we're in, we are very, very mindful that they had an environment for a year plus, which was very safe, and they've learned to work with. So as we reintroduce people, and we've got to make sure that we keep those mission critical roles safe, secure, and feeling as if they can continue, rather than suddenly I had this really peaceful, lots of space, and now I'm being crowded in. So we're very mindful of that. I think in our retail environment, in our branch environment, they are roles that are there to serve members face to face, and there's a lot of conversation going on. They are more fixed roles. I think the thing we've done in the branches through the pandemic is we were doing this before and we'll continue to do this, is the branch in itself really becomes a microcosm of the society, with all the culture, all of the values, etc., but really has to run as its own identity to run. And we're very, very mindful of that. So a lot of the branches, obviously we closed some of the hours during the pandemic to give more space and freedom to people to look after themselves. We're also carrying on with some of that, but looking for the flexibility so people are not forced into a position they don't want to be. And that was quite key. So everyone in the branches, if you don't want to be here because of, have that conversation with your manager, and we can make some choices. And quite a few of them moved, especially those who needed to isolate, moved to home working and doing other tasks. And one of the things we've got on the agenda, which I'm sure most financial institutions are doing the same, is how we multi-skill our folk to make sure that this lesser demand for face-to-face branch contact in the future doesn't mean to say that we have people that don't have a role, because we can expand that role to do support the digital, support the telephony, etc., etc. So it's giving the branches enough identity to feel wanted, but they do know they need to be there a certain amount of the time. So it's not, you can't do branch member contact from home face to face. So
no, thank you. I mean, some of these risks and challenges that need to be managing, I was just wondering what are some of those top risks, other than what you've already mentioned, that need to be managed and challenge you?
Well, they range from the really, really big stuff around maintaining the thing that makes Nationwide such a special place to work, which is that cultural thing and that cohesion across the organisation, so that value set remains in place. That's really high. But as you work your way down through that list of risks, you've got risks right down to, my place of work. It used to be in Swindon in my case, but now I'm working from home. So you get down into things like, can I claim expenses if I suddenly have to go somewhere else? And then if you start recruiting somebody who's based in Aberdeen, but their primary place of work, I guess their primary team is based down in Bournemouth, where is their place of work, and what does that mean for their need to travel? So you get into the real nitty-gritty of the big organisation stuff, but also the little stuff of what it means to somebody's pocket, because at the end of the day, that's what a lot of people come into work for, is to put a few pounds in their pocket. And there's lots and lots and lots of risks in between. There's learning, there's cascading information, there's mentoring, there's young people coming through. How do you make sure that, I'm of an age where I learned a lot by observing. Well, if you don't necessarily, if you're not in the office all the time, how do you observe to learn, both the good and the bad? So there's lots and lots and lots of risks. But I think it's fair to say we're pretty much on top of it. Well, we understand it. We don't have the answers for all of it.
Yeah, so I'll give a personal answer if it's okay to that, because I think one of the things what we've done here, so at the beginning of the pandemic, Boris Johnson et al. Was saying we mustn't go back to the bad old ways. So we've got to learn as we move forward, and learn from that. That can be to do with commuting, work-life balance, sustainability, etc., etc. I think as we've coming out of the pandemic, there seems to be people have become a little bit deaf to that in terms of the other effects that are coming out post-pandemic. So there seems to be this, it's either or. So we've got to be careful not to rush to the bad old ways. One of the biggest issues facing ourselves and organisations like us is the talent management. How do you, a lot of IT talent's required because of the digital world we're moving into. How do you attract, retain that talent? This post building we moved because it was seen as being a good place in London to attract the type of talent we needed and create an environment that would attract it, but also give people flexibility not to be sat at a desk for 9 till 5. As the world's moved on, what's the need of that talent to attract and retain, to make sure you've got the best people? Well, we don't know the answer to that, and I think that's developing all the time. But you've got to get that balance right. So do young people want to be able to sitting on their bed all day long developing on their laptops, or do they want to be inclusive and mentored, etc., at the same time as the answer can't be you're in the office or you're not in the office. So I think what we've got to do is all of us have got to say the world has moved on, and we've got to learn to use to adapt to the environment that's there and use that. Because in 20 years' time, someone may not be worrying about I couldn't do career progression because I couldn't see anybody to have a senior role and get to know them and create, because the way they will develop could be remotely. Yeah. It'd be different. Yeah. And the one feedback, just to build on that, the facilities team, the property services team, we thought we were quite inclusive, but we were very, very physically present, as you typically are. Going into the remote world, I would say we've had the most successful year of development, improvement, collaboration, inclusion, and we've been mainly remote. So in using the environment, most of our people who are still working in buildings say they feel a lot more included now because of the town halls on Teams, the remote, the virtual, etc. So it's a case of that, to me, is an example of how you can actually use the new world to help you develop sort of new talents, but still manage some of the old problems, etc. And you need to be mindful of that rather than just rush back to the office. I think that's not the answer.
There's quite a few questions coming in on collaboration and enabling that. And Gary has got another question. Gary's on fire today. Keep them coming, Gary. His question is, how do you make sure that teams come together at the same time and that they don't turn up on days when others are not there?
Well, so the second part of the question is easy to answer. You've got to book space. So you need to physically book space in our buildings to be able to come in. One of the things that we are spending a lot of time on is enabling our leaders across the business to be able to communicate with their teams effectively so that they understand, they can manage when people come together and they can understand the needs of their team so they can get them together all at once, if that makes sense. How do we ensure collaboration? Well, we've got a couple of choices, and this has come down to experimentation. We can either create a bit of an artificial regime where you say you've got to come in once a week, once a month, or you must come together within a given time frame. That's one option. Or you allow people to try and manage it themselves and then use the feedback that we're getting, because we have a whole lot of data points that we feed into. There's probably something people might be interested in. We gather data points from the 90 reps that Andrew mentioned earlier on. We get feedback from them all the time about what's working for them, what's not working for them. We also get information, tangible information, which we pick up from our HR colleagues about people calling in about stress and absences. We pick up stats from our IT help desk, and we bundle it all together in a basket and try and understand what trends and what issues we have across the piece, and then use that to speak to specific parts of the business about whether we think there's a trend of a problem and allow them to intervene or take whatever action they feel. So there are the two choices we have. You can create a regime where people are forced, but that feels a little bit forced to me, but it might work for other parts of Nationwide. Or you allow people and then use the data that you're gathering to feedback and see if it's working or not. And I think this comes back to freedom of choice. So this flexibility will create an environment where people can choose whichever works best for them.
Gary, it's a really, really difficult question. Yeah. If we can answer this question, I think we can solve the problems of the world. My view on it is you've got to empower managers to manage and talk to their teams, to understand their teams, to work out what works best for them. So I read it in one of the magazines recently. One of the things that the facilities property services team we did at the very beginning of COVID, we agreed a way that we would move forward to, and we check in on that, and that is a fairly remote way of working, and we check in on that every month at least to make sure that's still on and everyone gets a voice in that. We don't go to big surveys, we just have a conversation and say, is this still working? Do we still agree with it? And then we then spread that down through the team. So my leadership team put all that together, and then we get the feedback from their teams and put that down. Now, obviously, some people have to be on site, as we talked about branches, but how do we make it work for them? I think if you try and prescribe rules, days per week, rotas, etc., you're in for failure, because it just takes so much management. So somehow, it's easy while we're less busy, you've got to allow people to find that space for themselves and work it through, and then try and put the jigsaw together for all the different variables in the organisation to say this office space works for us by doing it this way. So no, not really an answer, but I think we'll be working on this one for a long time.
No, thank you. And actually some questions had come in about that, and that it is predominantly a culture element where you need to drive that and make sure that you keep on touching in with the teams. Another question that has come in, which is focusing on the fact that some FM issues have become very complicated, very mundane FM issues, like PAT testing laptops people are using at home, and enough first aiders, fire wardens in given flexible working, etc. Now, I appreciate we've talked about this before, that how can you make sure how far of those FM jobs extend into people's home spaces and other workspaces where they're working from?
So literally was discussing this yesterday. The interesting on the PAT testing. So I'll use that as an example. So PAT testing kit in people's houses. What's wrong with changing the regime? So rather than test in situ, what isn't that a visit to the office potentially, or a branch could be to pop in and get some PAT testing done on a visit. So that's one possible answer. So there'll be hundreds of reasons people say the screen's too big, etc., etc. But well, I think we've got to stop thinking about it as the same problem as in the office. So what's wrong with everyone just picking their kit up once a year and saying, today I'm booked in for 20 minutes of pat testing. So that may be one answer. Similarly, on the fire wardens, what about a slightly different approach? So who are the people that, fire wardens stroke first aiders, who are the people that are always in the building? Is there a different regime rather than having volunteers per floor, etc.? Well, where we're looking at internally is we've got all of our facility staff in the buildings with a small amount of encouragement. One, do they want to go down that route to become the first aiders, stroke fire wardens, or is there a different, far slightly different? There may be a slightly different answer to that, but say first aiders. And then secondly, what in terms of service improvement, do those same folk, do we want to take them to a slightly higher level of first aid? So, you know, we talk about defibrillator machines around the place, etc. So having someone who can operate a defibrillator in an office building, has been trained to do that, could be, and I say I'm careful with my words here because there's probably a load of people who say it's outside of remits of first aid, etc. But is there a further where the enhanced facilities team can give enhanced services? So look at it as opportunity for them rather than difficulty.
Thank you. Shifting a bit from very operational questions, I want to understand a little bit better how your teams are viewed as within the organization now. You know, you've been at the forefront of making these changes happen. How has that impacted or reflected upon the role of FM within Nationwide?
So I think the profile has never been higher, to be perfectly honest. All the years I've been working in FM, and this might resonate with a lot of people on the call, that there was many years ago that if nobody was complaining and you were a little bit invisible, you were probably doing okay because everything was going well. Well, that's absolutely not the case now. As Andrew said, the CEO now talks about the fact that we are enablers for lots of part of the business. So our success as a function is linked to the organization's success. And we enable them to be the very best they can be, which means that they deliver exceptional customer service. You know, so our link to our member, our end user, has never been so close. If that makes sense, it's very visible.
And if I could just pick up on that, I think then strategically, what does that mean? Capital investment, whereas before was always, is something that needs to be influenced by the service team. So what services do you want to offer and what environment do you want that? What's the right environment for collaboration, good welcoming, socialising space within the building? So that one's from how do more influence on the capital investment will come from this, from that building that trust. And then secondly is around the real estate space, because we've got to resist going back to the 0.6 ratio or the squeezing of that space because it's costly. There's actually a cost of not having the right space for people to be able to feel as if they're in a welcoming and a pleasant environment, an enabling environment for them to be their very best. And you can imagine office buildings with lots and lots of collaboration space and more squeezed desks with people trying to sit down at desks to work. That can't be the future. So rather than the typical squeeze the real estate space because it's an expensive element, there's got to be a case to be made based on this wellbeing for the right space to enable people to be their best. And that's key as we go forward from building on that success.
Okay. So much there to unpack. I've got about 3 different questions I want to ask right now. Talking about success, really, and obviously you've demonstrated success because you've kept your people working. But how do you really measure success towards your colleagues and the board?
Gosh, that's an interesting. So I think I touched on it a little bit earlier on. We use the network of ambassadors that we have across the estate to continuously get feedback. We have what's called a pulse survey that's regularly sent out to a random selection of colleagues every month. And then, of course, we have a very large annual employee feedback survey. So we have lots and lots of inputs. And going back to what I said about our values as well, we've created an environment where people aren't afraid to speak up. And we encourage people to speak up and give feedback. So we're constantly getting that feedback. Now, that's not to say that we're going to change something massive, enormous on the feedback of an individual, but we're constantly seeking feedback. We're constantly seeking input. Some of the things that we have to perhaps learn a little bit more about is how do we effectively manage things like productivity, and how do we effectively, in real time, rather than a long time pass before we realize we have a problem. And that's some of our learning and some of our experimentation that's going on. Does that answer the question, Zoe, do you think? Sophie, even?
Yeah,
I think I'll just
go ahead.
I'll say just success for the property services team was winning team of the year. That's a point in time, though. We keep saying that our biggest challenge going forward is what keeps us in people's eyes as being a successful team across the whole organisation, and that itself means we now need to step to the next challenges. And I think they're, as I talked about, strategic as well as tactical delivery. But at the end of the day, it's about feedback. Feedback is the real big success, because perception is much more important than the reality, isn't it? As we all know. So it's people having a great experience and being, well, that's somewhere I went. We had some external feedback as being, we have this saying within the property service team, we want to be the best. We're trying not to put a definition of that, because it becomes all measurable and we get bogged down into what's that. But being the best, and examples of that, being the best was winning that award. Being the best was a service, external person. And this is the best customer service I've had in an external building for a long, long time. So it's just getting those plaudits going through, and they resonate with the chairman, they resonate with the chief exec and the board. So that to me is how you keep measuring success, rather than it's a point ratio of this. It's a measure of that. So they're important, but not as important as the feedback.
Talking about some of that lesser important measurements that are very concrete. The buildings being used and real estate questions will continue to rise. I mean, by no means have we seen the end of the pandemic. So we're still a little bit learning and in a state of flux. So I think it is genuinely too soon to tell where we're ending up. But surely the measuring of the utilization of the space will be an impact. And how do you measure the utilization of your spaces?
So I have a tool on my mobile phone, so I can tap in now and I can look to the occupancy stats for any of our buildings at any moment in time. I think it refreshes every 15 or 30 minutes or whatever it is now. So we have the capability, because we've all got passes to log in, to understand the utilization of our buildings. And as I said, people book in as well, so we can forecast the utilization of meeting rooms, desks, and collaboration spaces.
I think for me, the first thing we've got to do is actually work out what is the utilization number we want going forward, as I talked about before. And then it's the case of, if that means that 600 people are utilizing the building, if it's 600 people, that's not the answer. So it's then looking at how that space is used. And there's quite a lot of survey tools around. We haven't invested in any of them yet, but and you've got to be careful to over measure, because but in reality, if we've got all of our buildings serving the people that are assigned to them, and we've got the right testing of what's going on in those buildings, we've got good utilization. I don't really want to go back or go to it must be 0.23 in this area, 0.56 over there, etc. And I think much more, as Patrick talked about in our annual surveys, is getting some questions in there. And we do have those questions which say, this is a good environment, this works for me, this enables me to be my best, etc. Probably are need to be the non-measurable side of the non-economic side of that equation as we go forward.
Yeah, so the right utilisation is more what the question should be, because you get the utilisation stats as the right utilisation. The buildings are being used in the right way.
No, thank you. That was very helpful and important to stress how important things like feeling that you're doing a good job because you're enabled. We've talked quite a bit about the current. So the future, what kind of what are you seeking to achieve over the next 6 to 12 months' time?
Oh, good question. So,
how long do we have?
The role that Patrick talked about at the beginning. So, from a property services point of view, we have a transformation plan over the next 2 to 5 years, which has some deliverables over the next 6 to 12 months. Being the best, right value for money, providing the right service, being adaptable are those. Where do we want to go? I think we need to get the right space for nationwide, and rather than jump in, we don't know the answer to that, as you take from this, but actually working constantly to work out what's the right space, understanding what the needs of the organisation are from a branch point of view, member contact, use of the branches, where the digital world's taking us, what we need in terms of telephony centres, how we really learn and measure and learn from what's happening with people working at home, and how does that impact. That's going to be an ongoing thing, and we're probably 3 or 6 months away of really getting some data in which says this is what's really going on, and then utilising that into how we adapt the property, and I'm including home in that, and to for our people. So it sounds a bit woolly, all of that, but in reality, we're in probably the most changeable situation I've been in my whole career, in terms of not knowing what's in front of us tomorrow, let alone in 6 to 12 months. So I think aim to meet the business's needs and influence the business needs based on what we're seeing is quite key.
Yeah, and just continue with the regime of keeping close to what that demand is, so that we're in a position to respond.
And of course, one of your commitments is around investment in the workplace. And I know there are sections of that and the importance of that in your Future of Work report, which is up now, and the link will have been distributed in the chat as well. Conscious that we're already nearing closing time, Patrick and Andrew, I want to give you a quick 30-second opportunity each to say last words.
So I'll start this. Something we as a we need to think about as a collective is actually what is work going to be going forward. And I think we need to start thinking, I think some of this is referred to in the Future Work document, but we need to look at the sustainability angle of this. And actually, we need to build on what we're currently coming out of. So spending time at home, spending time nearer to your home, less travel. How do you collaborate with your colleagues? How do you make communities, which may be with your work colleagues and further afield? How do we utilise space in the high street to enable that, so we can walk to work, cycle to work, but still be global? And that to me is the real challenges in front of us. Not, we've talked about a number of challenges about offices, but in reality, it's work. For me, the challenges of work are about community, about well-being, about sustainability. And I think there's a whole load of piece of being work near to home, and how does that enable you within your organisation? Who are your colleagues going forward, and how is that enabled? So that to me is the real challenge for the next 10 plus years, is the changing world, which is mainly driven by the sustainable element, is going to really influence a lot more.
Yeah, so I was going to talk about sustainability, so thank you for that, Andrew. But the one thing that we didn't dwell a lot on, Andrew just mentioned, is around people's well-being. So I think the thing that we're going to spend an awful lot of time on over the coming weeks, months, and possibly years is people's well-being, and understanding the impact on them and their families of some of the decisions that we're making. So that's going to be something I think is going to be incredibly important for us as an organisation. Something we're already mindful of, by the way, and something we've already done lots of really fantastic things about already, but it's got to continue to be at the forefront of our minds.
We're going to need another episode to talk about that, Patrick. I think what bringing this discussion to a close, I think as a take-home really is that whole piece around work as an activity, not a destination, and that's really paramount for today's discussion really, and what your case study is really showing to us. And really, you need to understand the principles of a culture, the space, and IT support to really support the vision of choice that works for the organization, its values, its needs, the productivity that needs to be achieved, and for its employees. And they're not last, but they're equally important in that balance because ultimately they deliver the work that you're seeking to achieve. For those that are in the audience that are transforming their workplace strategy, we have a workplace hub which has numerous guidance notes supporting workplace transition management. And that leaves me at 1 minute over time to say a very big thank you to Andrew and Patrick to come and share your experiences to date and aspirations for the future. And thank you to listeners as well. This recording will be available to anyone who wants to listen again, and there will be a follow-up in some news articles as well. So look for that in the forthcoming newsletter. And we look forward to welcoming you to our next webinar next week, same time, same place. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.